I want to go back to the trauma you've experienced, because I think there's a lot to learn also for maybe young women who have experienced violence or rape or something like that. And so we talked before, and you agreed that it's okay for you to ask these questions, and
Absolutely.
you're open about that. So you said that your initial reaction that almost came immediately was to find an excuse and find an alternative reality by saying, no, I lost my virginity instead of being raped to men. So when was the first time you really opened up to anyone about what happened?
Oh, that's part of the whole, like the story of, having my oldest son. That after the doctor came in and, and I was just like, wow. It was about 9 months later, and I'm so like, okay, like my body maybe isn't totally trash, and I'm juggling and struggling with these two ideals. That I was like, there's a word when somebody comes in and angrily puts their body inside your body. I'm thinking about the doctor and his birth and stuff. And I was like, and especially when you say no and they do it anyway. I was like, oh, there's a word. It's rape. It's rape. That's rape. When somebody angrily puts their body inside of your body against your consent. I was raped I didn't lose my virginity to two men at a party. I was raped by two men at a party. And it was in so many ways. And I was 23 years old. This happened when I was 14. I was almost 24 when I was like coming to this understanding. It was pretty close to 10 years afterwards. I was flooded with relief, because I was kind of like, everything makes so much more sense now. Like, it makes so much more sense how looking back and like, how the hell did I become a Nazi? How did that even happen? And it was like this wave of relief. Like, it was like, okay, like everything, the trajectory makes so much more sense now. And that would be the very beginning of having to learn how to process through that trauma, and intentionally. And it would be another, 5 or 6 years before I would understand, like, oh, I have like massive PTSD. Like that again, that idea of like, once you heal from one part of something, it's like, then you're in a place where the rest, the next step can be revealed to you. It's like almost like a video game or whatever. It's like, you've beaten the first boss, and now it's almost like you've beaten the first boss, and now you go on all these quests, and then you have the second boss who's harder to kill. And I feel like that's kind of like my life,
basically.
That it's like, instead of it getting easier, you're like, oh, now it's even harder. There's more stuff. It's more challenging. The new
but
stuff.
Up until that point where you had this realization, you never talked to anyone about what you've experienced that night?
No, I never did. And some of that was my relationship with my parents. Some of that was that I no longer played sports. So I didn't really have any meaningful relationships with other adults who I trusted. Some of it was that it was before the internet. So I couldn't even like Google, like, I was raped or whatever. Like, I couldn't, I didn't have any anonymous place. There was not a good dissemination of information about hotlines or what you should do. Like, we didn't talk about it as a culture at all, which is part of why I've chosen to be, in conjunction with my, sort of like commitment to radical honesty, that I want to commit to talking about all of the worst things that I've done and the worst things that have been done to me, to try to disarm shame. That I want it to be where we can all talk about the crap that normally we don't talk about because we feel shame. Instead of letting shame rule us with its dysfunction, where we feel unworthy of love and connection. It's like, well, if we can just all know that everybody has things that they so deeply regret. Obviously, most people haven't been Nazis, so there's not that, there's not that level of like things where you're just like, wow, this is really bad. But everyone has that stuff. Everyone has their stuff that they don't really want to tell anybody at all. And my premise is that if we can actually tell people that and talk about that, then it won't keep creating these dysfunctional societies that we live in. It's like, we can just talk about it, and we don't need to have all this emotional charge around it. That we can just that we can heal, we can speed up the process of healing a lot more quickly, which I think is, you see some of that, with like the Me Too movement and stuff like that. And, I hope that that dialogue will continue, but I didn't have anybody to talk to. I didn't have any resources. I went to a all girls Catholic high school. So like most of the teachers were nuns, it's like, I'm really like, who, like, I'm going to go tell them. So I didn't have anyone that I felt like I could tell.
And what about your friends that were with you at the party? Did they realize that you've been assaulted, or did you disappear for a while and then came back? Or how?
I did, but it was, it was a party, and it was like people had been drinking, and everybody was, sort of on their own, doing their own stuff or whatever. And, that it was like, it wasn't cause for alarm that I wasn't there. It's like there were people who were like passed out and stuff. It wasn't, nobody's paying attention.
So it actually happened during the party, not after the party, or it actually happened during that party. And then
it was kind of afterwards. It was like, it was like I had been, there was actually another young woman and I who were hanging out with these two guys in the front yard. And they were white guys. Sometimes people ask that. They're like, well, were they black guys? I was like, no, they were white guys. The trajectory of expressing, my hate and hate-filled ideology it wasn't a direct correlation that way. It wasn't like I had been harmed by black people, which in fact, like when I was a really little kid living still in Philadelphia, I was actually like in a breakdance group with a bunch of my good friends from school who were all black, and they like listened to like a lot of the early like breakdance music and hip hop and stuff. So like that, so it was not some sort of like direct leap of like I had been harmed by a person of color and now was projecting that outwards. These dudes were white. And she and I were like hanging out, outside with these dudes. And I remember, I remember bits and pieces, like I have hyper specific memories. Like I remember what I was wearing. I remember particular smells and stuff like that. That's, again, just the curious way that your brain deals with trauma. It's like, there's parts of it that I have no memory of, and then there's parts that I have hyper-specific memory of. But I do remember, we were sitting, talking. I remember talking about how I wanted to be an English professor when I grew up, and that I didn't want to have sex until I was married. I remember saying no. And then one of the next things I remember is that I woke up in the backseat of his car with him on top of me. I remember the taste of his hair in my mouth. And I remember, waking up to myself sort of like moaning and him saying, see, I told you it would feel good. And I wrote a short piece about this too. And in that piece of writing that, talk about like turning my face into the crack of the car seat when he said that, because it did feel good. Like, and the shame of that, like that it's like, I can't help what my body feels, that doesn't remove the trauma or whatever. And then I passed back out, and then I remember waking up with his friend who had been out there with the other young woman that I was with. But she had, she was gone by that point, and then his friend was on top of me. And then one of the next things I remember is one of them walking me to the back door of the house, which was like a wooden screen door. And like, I remember the sound of it as it closed behind me. And so I like stumbled into the kitchen, and then there were a bunch of people there, and they were like making chicken nuggets or whatever. Like, oh, Shannon, hey, here, have some chicken nuggets or whatever. Like, yeah, like, it was like, and, I remember sitting there, in exact, what I was wearing, having this, bright white paper plate with this glob of ketchup on it and these chicken nuggets. And I remember the chair that I was sitting in eating these chicken nuggets. So it was this very sort of like surreal hyper
It's
memory
like
and then
ins and outs of memory. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you know the guys beforehand, or was it someone that you?
I didn't, and they were much older. They were definitely like dudes that were like in their 20s, and were not people that we like regularly hung out with. Like I'd never seen them before. They just, they had just showed up at this party. It was the party was like way out in the middle of nowhere in like super rural Michigan. So it was like, it's kind of like if there's a party, anyone, it's like there was nothing for anyone to do. So it was like if there was a party, it was like everybody was going to show up for that party. So I had never seen them. I didn't know who they were. There was, there was no way for me to even like report them or or whatever.
So you never reported the incident and you never saw them again? Okay.
No. I mean, I don't think I ever saw them again.
So there was no even from now there wouldn't be a way to kind of make a connection who that could have been. Okay. And
and the way that reporting works, like I don't even know, like the people who go on to report their rapes, like I admire them so very much because you have to relive the trauma over and over and over again. There's just something that I read just today on Facebook. That was an article about a young woman who killed herself after like having to hold up her underwear at her own, like at the trial of her rapist. Mm-hmm. And it's just like the trauma that you have to relive in order to report is so immense. That we've got to do better in terms of how we take in rape report cases, and it's the only crime that's reported where people don't believe the victim. That if you report like, hey, my stuff has been stolen or whatever, some guy came by and hit me in the face, the cops aren't like, well, prove it or whatever, and it's not the individual police, it's the way that the system is rigged. That it's like that the burden of proof is really on the victim of rape. Like that.
And then you were intoxicated as well, so that probably plays into the equation as well. So you were drunk, so who knows what really happened. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So what do you say to a victim, whether it's a boy or a girl, or a man or a woman who experienced this? Should they report immediately, or what is it now that you've went through this and that you probably talked to other victims as well? What's the best reaction to that?
I would absolutely positively find someone, an adult that you trust in your life, and let them know. And if not, then you can let me know. You can contact me through whatever means are connected with this video, and you can absolutely connect with me, and I will help get you resources that you need. If you don't have an adult that you can trust in your life, Google, I was just raped, I need help. And there will be crisis hotlines and different things that come up that can help connect you with resources. And they can be as anonymous as you need them to be. Mm-hmm. If you do not have, if you feel still physically in danger, or you are, physically brutalized, go immediately and go to an ER. Make them run a rape kit on you. Ask for copies of all of the records before you leave. Have them on your person so that you have copies of them, so that should you choose to go report, that you have control of your information. Even if you decide not to report for so many reasons that people decide not to report, you will at least have taken this step. However, try to have a supportive adult with you. Ask in the ER. There are advocates, sexual assault advocates, who are affiliated more and more with hospitals so that they can be with you, because getting a rape kit tested can be traumatic in and of itself. They've got to do lots of swabbing, and it can be very clinical. And so try to bring someone with you that you trust, but do not keep silent about it. It will destroy you. Even if you are afraid, and there are so many reasons to be afraid, because it's your dad, it's your uncle, it's someone in power, it's your boss, it's, somebody who the whole rest of your community looks up to, or whatever. Tell someone that you trust. Connect with the resources that are out there. There, as we've over the last 25 years, we have gotten so much better about at least having the beginnings of some rudimentary services to help people who have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted. Make use of them.
Were you afraid that no one would believe you? Was that part of the reason why you didn't tell your friends or your parents? You explained that they were kind of pushing back or accusing back to you, whatever it was. But were you ever afraid no one would believe you when you tell anyone?
I don't think that was my fear. I don't think my fear was that no one would believe me. I think a lot of it really is that, like, I really felt like I was, that I was going to be like, that my experience was going to be diminished. That it was like, yeah, like, okay, whatever. But you were at a party and you were drinking, so what do you expect? Or, or whatever. That it wasn't that I thought people would be like, no, you weren't. Mm-hmm. That I think where my fear really lied was that it was going to be like, well, what did you, the whole idea of like, well, what were you wearing or whatever? And it's like, and we have a lot more dialogue about that out in the open now about what difference does it make what I was wearing? That doesn't give someone the right to violate me. That we didn't have any of those discussions going on or whatever. And so I really think it was that idea of like being blamed for this happening to myself. I mean, I don't know. I'm speaking now as that was 30 years ago this year. So it's like, trying to really, really tap into, how I was thinking when I was a 14-year-old is, some of this is projecting backwards on that, but I really think like a lot of it was really just being afraid that I was going to be blamed for, and that I was going to be in trouble. I was afraid I think that's really like, I was afraid I was going to be in trouble. I've been grounded my whole life for not doing my homework. Like, so it was like, I think I was afraid that I was going to be in trouble, like it's something, and not even necessarily like on some sort of like bigger level. I was like, I don't want to be grounded. Like, I don't want to be grounded. I don't want to be in trouble for this. Like, I don't want to deal with all of the stuff that comes along with this. Like, I don't want to be grounded. I don't want to have to answer for it. I don't want to have to talk about where I was or whatever. But I didn't know that it would have such catastrophic outcomes for not talking about it. I had no idea that it would have been much better to have been grounded for a little bit or whatever and gotten access to the kinds of help that I actually needed than not be grounded and then, have this whole lifetime of dealing and trying to heal from this.
Did you ever see professional coaching, or was it more of a self-healing effort? After I had my son, I've gone in and out of different kinds of counseling and coaching and, whatever it is, different kinds and different times. And, some of it is like when I've reached sort of an acute point of something that I don't know how to find out the information. Like one of the times that I went to counseling, it was like hyper practical, where I was just like, I don't understand what reasonable boundaries even are. So I really need someone that I can come to and just be like, is this a reasonable boundary? Because I don't know, because I didn't grow up having, reasonable boundaries communicated in a healthy way or whatever. So like, I didn't even know if things were reasonable. Like I totally bought like, okay, that's how you have a healthy relationship and develop healthy boundaries. But I didn't know what reasonable boundaries were. And so it was like stuff like, is it reasonable for me to expect my 5-year-old to make their bed? And, and the counselor was like, well, yes, but you have to let them make it as a 5-year-old and not expect them to make it as an adult would. And it was like, oh, okay, like that makes sense. Like that's so useful to me, which, I guess a lot of other people probably just inherently know, but I had no idea. Like I didn't understand, like, is it, and that idea of like, is it reasonable for me to say, hey, can you go ahead and fix X, Y, or Z? And if
if I ask you, you know, I'm going to give you like 3 months, and if it's not done, then I'm going to, you know, just see if I can get a professional or whatever to fix it or whatever. Like, is that reasonable, or is that not a reasonable amount? Like, what, like, is 3 weeks reasonable? 6 months? Like, you know, like, so I needed like hyper practical sort of information about boundary setting, because I understood that it was something, a skill that I was woefully lacking, that I had to intentionally practice, but I didn't understand like the parameters for what that entailed. You know, like I didn't understand. So that was like, that was several months of counseling, was really about boundary setting, and really focused on some of the more like practical senses of boundary setting. But also, you know, I've had like some talk, you know, like talk therapy and psychotherapy and stuff, just to, you know, some of it was, I had the behavioral cognitive therapy to help deal with the PTSD that I would have. Some of it was learning how to, you know, was help identifying when I was in like a triggered moment or whatever, like learning to identify like, okay, like I'm freaking out because I've got 3 kids under the age of, you know, 6, and like my house is a mess, and like, but I'm not responding with the appropriate amount of like of urgency about that. Like, it's terrible and all that stuff, but I'm really responding with an emotional response that is from way long ago, and that is not in correlation with what's happening in present reality. And so like having, going through the process and going through counseling of trying to help identify, okay, like I'm not responding to what's present right now. I'm responding to like past trauma and not what I'm struggling with right now. And learning how to be like, okay, all right, now I just yelled at you for, I just like freaked out about that, but it's like, okay, oh shoot, like, all right, you know, man, I messed that up. Like, I'm not really responding to this right now. And, you know, learning better skills to minimize some of the impact of responding, you know, trauma driven out of stuff. And, you know, as opposed to, you know, I don't know. I don't even know. I can't even imagine what life is like for people who do not have brains that are wired like mine. Like they're, you know, like I don't understand what it must be like to never like be depressed. Like I can't, like there are big chunks of time in my life where I literally have to live sort of hour to hour and day to day, like just insist like, today's the day you stay alive. This hour is the day that you stay alive. That just, you know, it's like the way that my brain has developed and has grown, that it's like there are very acute times for me where I still intensely struggle and intensely, like I have got to commit hour to hour to just simply staying alive. Like I can't imagine what it would be like to have a brain that's wired where you don't have to work to stay alive. Like I can't imagine that. Like it's, you know, it's just so far outside of my reality that I can't imagine what that must be like.
Here comes the sunshine and burns away clouds like they never were.